So, how can we learn from our progress so far? And specifically, how can we use data to reflect on our program's results? Today, we're going to be talking about gathering information, using it, making our programs better.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Coffee Time with Masterminds. My name is Peta Blakely, and I'm the founder and principal of Blakely Consulting.
Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. I am Cynthia Rojas, founder and principal of To Your Growth.
Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. I'm Rebecca Tuttle, founder and principal of Grant Right Now and Grant Writing for Good.
So, it's almost the end of the year. We might have collected some useful data. What are we going to do with it, Cynthia?
That's a good question. I love today's topic because, you either have a whole lot of data you don't know what to do with, or you don't have enough data and you have to prove your impact. But today, Peter, in preparing for the show, you use the term data point. And so you're going to be using it a lot throughout the show. And I thought we would start with, when you say data point, what can nonprofits envision that to be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean something really specific, but you're probably closer to having it than you realize. So what I mean is a piece of information distilled down to the level that it can be expressed with a value, right? A time point. That's it. We'll stop there. A value and a time point. So this is something that you can count or calculate. Refers to some period of time, like this month, this quarter, this year, right? This semester, something like that. Yeah. It starts with a number sign or a dollar sign or a percent sign. This is really important. If it starts with any other language than that, it's just too amorphous, right? It's not really going to do us any good for our analysis purposes. And we need something that we can compare from time point to time point so that we can ask ourselves, is this getting better? Are we making progress? Right? So I think a lot of times people understand like the concept that they want to be looking at. They have a hard time agreeing on like one measure that's going to do it for them, right? Yeah. So like we might all say attendance is really important. What I'm going to ask you to do is to come up with one way that you measure attendance that you can all in your organization agree is close enough, right? Mm-hmm. If this number is moving in the right direction, then we know that attendance in general is moving in the right direction. So you might select the percentage, the average percentage of students who were there, right, on all of the days of that course. You might select the percent of students who were there for more than 90% of the classes, right? You might go with a lower is better metric, like the percent of students who are chronically absent or missed more than 40% or 50%, however you define chronically absent in your program, right? Any of those is a good metric. And there's a good chance that they're all trending in the same direction. You just need to pick one that's the important one that says, we're all going to keep our eye on this, and we're all going to believe that if this is moving in the right direction, attendance in general is moving in the right direction. What we're doing is being effective.
You know what's so funny is that when you started with the example, I thought there's only one way to measure attendance.
Oh, there's so many ways to measure attendance.
You check off somebody's name. You're either here or not here. And you just gave us 4 different ways.
4 different ways. And it gets more complicated than that, right? So what if somebody withdraws during the program, right? So your denominator is changing on a given day, right? So these are the kinds of things that you've got to agree on in advance.
Mm-hmm.
No. That's the joy of being live. This is the kind of thing you have to agree on in advance, because if you don't, when you start to try to make decisions using this metric, you're going to find that people didn't buy in on the metric, and people are going to start to have conversations about like, that doesn't really represent the important
Yes.
construct, or, I don't think that captures the important thing about our program. And that is really going to distract you from having the conversation you want to have, which is, how can we make sure that all of the participants are successful in our program? How can we make sure they all attend enough, right?
Yeah. So we could stay with this example, because one, I really did think there was only one way, but so this is a great example of how you could look at data from more different directions. And so if you have a drop-in center that you keep open for 4 hours a day, and you want teenagers to drop in, maybe just gathering census data, the number of people who came in that day, might tell you what are your busy times, when do you need to be staffed the most, when do people come in, and things of that nature. But if you're running a program that's 6 weeks long and the information they're learning is cumulative, then the frequency, the dosage, how many times one person came, might be important. That's another way that you might.
Wow. Yeah, it might be crucial, right? And when you think about, little kids attending school, if they're not attending, they're not getting any of the services that they need, right?
Well,
so
so the thing about schools, which is really interesting, is that it serves as a proxy for something else, right? So we know that if you have 25 or more days off in a year, that you're more likely to struggle, right? And have chronic absenteeism. So schools use that 25-day marker to make sure that kids who are exhibiting that type of chronic absenteeism get services and get help. So wow.
And that is, that is an important marker, just as important as overall attendance.
And so we're also working on or have had conversations about workforce. So do you have a data point, just as another example, do you have a data point in which people could look at data all different ways?
So we look a lot at unemployment rate, right? Employment and unemployment. One of the data points that I really like and that I don't think we pay enough attention to is the labor force participation rate, which is the number of adults in the population who are even trying, right? Who either have a job or are trying to find a job. There's another group of adults who maybe they don't need a job, right? They've retired, or but there's another group that have just given up, right? That are not able to get a job, or don't feel that they're going to be able to get a job, or they're so preoccupied with basic elements of staying alive that they don't have time to search for a job. So to me, labor force participation is an important indicator of overall well-being for a population.
So it sounds like Priscilla wants to attend the show. You're probably taking care of Priscilla, so I'll do some talking in the meantime. So I do think it's really interesting, because the unemployment rate could be misleading, although the thing about data is that it's very difficult to measure everything. It's the thing about data is that it's very difficult to measure everything. So even the government uses one measure or one data point, such as the unemployment rate, right? Because they can measure that by the number of people getting benefits. It could be a little bit harder to measure people who want a job but have stopped looking. So, and that's something that we have all agreed on. We have used that data point for years and years, and we're able to track it over time. But we should realize it is not the most accurate number in what you said, the wellness of the labor market.
And you raise two other good points. One is we can track it over time, which is one of the things that makes a data point really helpful and useful. And the other one is understanding exactly what it does and does not tell us, right? And agreeing on that in advance.
And all data has its limitations.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And that can really lead to conflict, where people say, this data is not capturing the magical specialness of my program, right?
I love
And I say it doesn't have to,
that.
right? It can be close enough. There are some things that if you're doing it well, this measure is going to trend in the right direction. It does not have to be perfectly accurate. It only has to show you the direction that you're headed in.
Yeah, yeah. And enable you to have conversations about what is missing or what
Right.
does it tell us. And so I love that. So you're building a class, a workshop, a virtual,
Yes.
an online workshop. And
Yep.
tell us what your workshop is talking about, because it's geared for nonprofits.
Yes. Yep. It's 100% for nonprofits. It's for program directors who want to get their arms around their data. And it's quick, right? It's not going to take you months and months, but it's going to walk you through creating a logic model for a program, a really clear and parsimonious one, so that you can use it for evaluation, designing performance measures that are useful for you, inventorying all of the measures in your organization.
Yes.
Right? So that you could know what they all are and synthesize them across departments and different parts of your organization. Then we're going to KonMari them. We are going to get rid of the duplicates and the near neighbors, and we are going to pick one way to measure each important thing. We're going to make an agenda for data points that we need and think would be useful, but we don't have yet. And then we're going to talk about how to structure conversations to use that data, right? Because I think people get really afraid, right? You start talking about, using our program's performance measures to make decisions about our programs, and people really get scared, right? One, because if you haven't done accountability before, there's a lot of confusion between program accountability and staff accountability. And people will think I'm getting judged, like the extent to which I'm doing my job is getting judged. We are not here to judge that. We're here to judge whether the program is working. And it is no one individual's fault if your program is not working. It's also no one individual's accomplishment if your program is working. This is a team effort, right?
And there's a whole ecosystem, right?
Yes.
So you might find you have low attendance to a workshop because a lot of your participants live on a bus route and the buses aren't working really well at 7 p.m. at night.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, we had a program once. It was a program for parents and babies, and there was going to be a play group and resources for the parents. We got a space for it. It seemed great. What we forgot was it's Boston in January, and this event is at 5:30 at night, and people are not going to bring their babies out after dark, right, in the freezing cold to go to playgroup. Right? It just, it wasn't going to work. So, and this is really, what I want to encourage people to do when they have a data point is dig deep, right? On if you see that it's not hitting the way you think it should be, or you're not satisfied with the value you're at, think deeply about the causes of these problems, right? Like, what are the obstacles? Back in the day, people used to attend, people didn't attend our programs, and we would stop just describing the problems. Well, they're just not showing up, right? And that is victim blaming. It is deficit framing, right? It is, and it's completely unproductive. When you stop there, you are never going to address this problem. So let's use exercises like 5 whys, right? They're not showing up. Why? Well, because they just don't come here. Why? Well, because they have a lot of other things to do. Why? Well, because they have to get resources for their families. They have to manage medical appointments. Maybe their children aren't in daycare. Oh, why? Well, you can see how we're going to uncover a whole lot of more interesting ways to address this problem than just stopping with it's the fault of the participants and they didn't value our program enough, right? So, that's one really good frame. A data walk, which you and I have worked on together, where you have a whole group of people looking at their organization's data. And I like to put it on poster paper in really simple, like hand-drawn charts and stick it on the walls and then have people walk around it like it's a gallery in pairs and trios and bringing together people from across departments and really look at the data and say, what does this tell me? Or what other questions does this bring up for me? What two pieces of data do I think we should look at together? What things that do I think are related to each other? Does one of these data points contribute to another one of these data points? And that can start to evoke really interesting conversations where you realize there are some powerful interventions that you can make that you might not have otherwise have thought of.
Yeah. I remember you did that with an organization and they told me it was one of the most powerful exercises they had done.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's important. I want to go back to, I thought the 5 whys was a really interesting framework. And one thing that I find with organizations is that many of them think or confuse census data with outcome data. And they both have a place, but they're not the same. So outcome data tends to lean toward impact. It is how the people you are serving are benefiting. The census data is things like gender and address, age, and things like that. And so in asking the whys, right, and I love the example about the Boston snow in January. If you had people's addresses, you could see the zip codes where people are coming from and maybe determine that
the bus routes that people are coming from.
Or that your building is not the best building to host the workshop, that it needs to come from a different building, or that the ages of the individuals that you are serving are older. And so that might change what you might serve for dinner, and it may change your activities, it may change a lot of things. So both data points have a purpose, but they're very different from each other.
Yes. And so the data point that you called census or demographic data, right, can be super helpful in asking questions like, are we reaching the people we want to reach?
Right.
If my program is designed to reach low-income people, are most of these participants low income? If I want some equity in terms of the race, ethnicities, and genders that participate in my program, am I achieving that? So you can have outcomes or performance measures relating to the demographic data, right? Yeah. The demographic data on its own, not so helpful, right? I mean, so you served 100 people this year. How many people were there who needed your service?
Right. Or 100 out of how many, right? And so data has to be talked about in relation to something.
In the context.
In its isolation, it doesn't work. It's interesting. You're building this virtual workshop for individuals, and I'm working on a storytelling retreat with an organization, and they want to be able to tell the story of their work. And while storytelling is great and anecdotes are great, you also want to use data. But saying that 90% of the people, or saying 90%, let's just assume we have 90% attendance in our workshop, doesn't really give you a picture, right? 90% of how many?
Right.
First of all, that's just a proportion, but that 90% could be 4 out of 5 or whatever.
And was there something special about the people that didn't attend?
Right, exactly. And so who is attending? Tell us their story, right? And so if you say we served 100 people, 100 out of how many?
Yeah.
And that's important.
And this is a point where I think a lot of organizations are actually afraid to talk about this, right? And I encourage organizations to say something like, we served 100 people out of a population of 1 million people who needed this service. I think they're often afraid to do that, right? And then they're afraid to talk about the problem that they solve on the level of the city or the community, right? So like, let's say that I have an anti-poverty program and I'm placing myself on the side of the organizations that are going to reduce poverty in my community. I should probably be looking at some measure of poverty in my community, right?
Uh-huh.
And either looking for it to go down or being able to illustrate that there was a lot of it, that we need more resources. And often I get this pushback, which is, but we're not going to solve this problem. We can't take responsibility for this problem for the entire city. So we don't want to measure that. Which I say, are you not at least on the side of the organizations and entities and allies and forces that are going to solve this problem? It's okay to say this is a big problem and we're a small organization. Like that's just the truth. There's no reason to hide that. Don't you want to be able to say this is a big problem and we need more resources, right? Don't you need to be able to say when you are out there telling your organization's story and describing what you do, how much need there is, right? And wouldn't it be great if we had a whole lot more resources and we could enroll 200, 300, 500% more participants because this problem is big. But you also want to be keeping your eye on the scale of this problem, because it helps you understand whether you and all these other organizations that are doing the work are being effective, right? And it's a complicated story to tell, right? Yes, we're doing the work, but there's also all these other things going on, right? But when you're following this trend line, you can say, here's what we're doing, but environmental factors are doing this, right? You can tell a much more nuanced story, right?
Yeah.
It's going to help you advocate for the resources you need. Pretending that you're ignorant of the bigger problem while you fight to address the bigger problem to me does not make sense.
Right. And you said something important, Peter. You said being able to tell that story, even if you don't know why this is happening, but the fact that you've gotten this far enough to question why is that happening means that you're looking at your data, and people love that. Donors love it. Funders love it. The community loves it. You don't always have to have an answer. And I remember one of the first studies I did at an organization, I found that we used to have this program where kids were part of the program for about 24 months. And we would say it in everything we announced as if that was the best thing in the world, right? Because we love that we could support kids for that long. Yeah. So we decide to see how well kids were doing. And so we assess the staff and we assess the kids that we were serving. And what we found actually is that at about the 14 or 15 month mark, kids felt that they were doing worse while the staff thought that they were doing better. Mm-hmm. Staying in the program for 24 months was not effective. It actually worked in the reverse. Did we know why? No, but we looked at the data and we were so curious. We presented this data to the funder, telling them honestly, I have no idea what this means, but it gives us an opportunity to look at the program. They gave us more money to study that problem. Why were kids feeling like they were worse off the longer they stayed? And guess what? We cut the program and made it 1 year long. Highly effective. And
I love that. You had a data point, and instead of like hiding from it or keeping it a secret, you enlisted your funder as an ally and said, hey, let's get curious about this.
Oh yeah.
This is important and we don't know what's going on. Yeah. And then they wanted to help.
Yeah. And so what you're also talking about, although you're not naming it, is the framework used by results-based accountability. Yeah. Some people might also know it as RBA. Yeah. And so what RBA does is solve the problem that you were naming, where a small program tends to shy away and say, oh no, we are not having population level impact, which is getting everybody out of poverty.
Right.
But what RBA says is, wait a minute, you are contributing to that. And if you don't think you're doing enough, let's look at the factors in which we could do more. Maybe we start an advocacy department and do some policy work.
Right. Or, who are our allies who are also doing it, and how can we support them?
Yeah. Let's bring in some partners. Mm-hmm. So really looking at your data is the first step to a very long journey.
Yeah.
A very long journey.
And it really is. And I recommend, a journey starts with a single step. A journey of looking at and using your data starts with a single data point. And, having more data is not better. Picking one data point and agreeing in advance on how you're going to use it, right? So, I ask people or organizations to document, what is this data point? Why do we measure it? What does it represent for us? What other measures is it relating to? Are there balance measures? So if we impact this one, do we want to make sure that this other one stays in an acceptable range, right? So for example, if we enroll more people, do we want to make sure that we maintain our attendance rate and our graduation rate, right? Have these conversations in advance, not after you're presented with an actual number, because then people get fearful and defensive, right? So I encourage people to create their discussion guide in advance. And then just once they get a data point, follow the steps. And that will help you all stay on the same page and having a constructive conversation.
Yeah. And we have to remember, and I love when you said it, that this is not about how effective you are as an individual. We should all be so powerful, right?
Right.
Power to have that kind of change. Wow.
Yeah.
But it really is, it is an opportunity to look at the entire system and really look at it not to blame, but to create opportunity.
Right. It's not just you, and it's not just your program or organization, right? It's what is this entire ecosystem doing?
Right. Yeah. Right. And so you put up the website, the URL for your training.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Learn more about the training there.
Yep. peterblakely.com/training. Yeah. For our listeners, we do have listeners in Australia. Okay. Well, this has been great. I think that as we start thinking about the rest of the conversations and topics that we're going to cover as we come into the end of the year, looking at reflecting and seeing the work that we've done and being able to tell that story is going to be really important. And maybe we do a show on storytelling.
We should definitely do a show on storytelling. Yeah. And I mean, here would be my one last piece of advice is just start now, right? Don't overthink it, right? Like I tend to overthink a lot of things. And don't think that you can't use any metrics or you can't use any data to start to have these conversations until you're measuring everything under the sun and you're doing it in a scientifically rigorous way. Not true, right? Pick one data point, select a way of measuring it that's close enough, right? That you at least believe if this number is moving in the right direction, we are moving in the right direction with our program. You can impute, you can guess if you have to, right? You can estimate, and then you can make a plan to make this measure get better. But you can start now.
As long as you said that you did those things.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, you can start now.
I love that. Start now. You'd be surprised how much data you already have.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, you do. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you, Peter. Great conversation.
Have a great weekend, everybody.